Well, everybody, I know what you're thinking right now. It's Mike with Hardware Canucks, and yes, I am surrounded by coolers again. So let me explain to you what's going on here. So a couple of weeks ago, I ended up posting a video that covered all of the ultra low profile coolers I could find. So those coolers were 48 millimeters and less. In this roundup, I'm going to be taking it up to the next level, but still sticking in that low profile bracket for the ITX users out there. So I'm going to be taking all the coolers that some of you guys suggested and that I could find between 49 millimeters and all the way up to 65 millimeters. But it's actually 66 millimeters because I expanded it by just 1 millimeter because I needed to include just one that I'm sure you guys would have killed me if I didn't include. So anyways, I've got a ton of coolers here, 9 to be exact. I wanted to cut through all the crap and start with the smallest all the way to the largest. And the shorty of the bunch is the Silverstone KR-01 at just 54 millimeters high, but that doesn't mean it's the cheapest here because it's actually 30 bucks and there's others that are even less expensive. It's a bit surprising since it has one of the most basic designs here with an 80 millimeter fan and a levered installation for AMD systems, which by the way is all it's compatible with. And the next cooler I want to talk about is this little guy. This is the ID Cooling IS-50X V2. Now ID Cooling is actually a very interesting company. You've seen them in the last roundup, you're seeing them again in this roundup. And they are one of the few companies that keeps on updating and launching new low profile coolers. All of the other companies here, or the vast majority of them, they've either let their lineup completely stagnate or they've updated it here and there. ID Cooling, they're taking a different approach. They're doubling and even tripling down on that ITX market. All things considered though, this is a pretty interesting little guy since it uses a compact heatsink that's fed by a whole 5 heat pipes and topped by a huge, for a low profile cooler at least, 120 millimeter by 15 millimeter fan. Now you might think packing a 120 millimeter fan into such a small fin assembly would cause issues with installation, but it actually doesn't, since it overhangs the motherboard I/O area instead of the memory. And while the IS-50X is one of those sort of new kids on the block, this thing is a legend. The Scythe Shuriken 2. It's been around for the better part of 5 years now, and look, if a recipe works, why change it, right? It's got the same price as the IS-50X, but its build quality is one of the best here. There's a dense fin array, a great 92 millimeter fan, and a properly solid base plate without HDT. It just feels like a weapon. And there's another ultra well-built cooler in this roundup, and that's this guy. This is the AXP 100 full copper edition. Now, I mean, look at this. It looks like a piece of high-end jewelry, and it actually weighs a ton. But there's something that you need to take into account as somebody looking for ultra low profile or low profile coolers when it comes to the AXP 100 series. There's a ton of these coolers out there, all different price ranges, all different designs, but the full copper right now is the only one that's 58 millimeters high. All of the other ones are quite a bit taller. So if you're building an ITX system, don't just assume that the AXP 100 series will fit based on this video. Either way, the AXP 100 full copper is just a thing of beauty. From its polished base to the way the 6 heat pipes are capped, it's almost flawless. The only problem is that its installation system is a bit of a pain in the butt since there's a ton of tiny components that you have to contend with. But otherwise, there's nothing to complain about. But speaking of complaining, we've come to the one part of the video that I'll usually complain about, and that's with anything Cooler Master, right here. In the last video, I cannot emphasize this enough. The G200P ultra low profile cooler, oh my god, guys. That thing gave me fits with installation. Its performance was terrible and it was overpriced. This, on the other hand, the A71C is different in every single way. First of all, at just 20 bucks, it's the second least expensive cooler here, which shouldn't be a surprise considering it looks like a basic stock heatsink replacement, but shrunken down to fit in a low profile environment. And unlike other heatsinks from Cooler Master, it's got a super straightforward installation process that just reuses the stock AMD backplate. The only thing that's a red flag to me is that small copper heat core instead of heat pipes. But hey, it's got an RGB fan that can either be changed through a standard motherboard 5-volt header or with the included inline controller. And the only other RGB cooler here is this. When looking at specs alone, ID Cooling's IS-60 EVO seems to have it all. A compact design at just 64 millimeters high, a solid base, 2 fans, a price that undercuts higher end coolers by quite a bit. I mean, overall, this thing looks great for the price, and the second fan, along with those 6 heat pipes tied into a solid base, could add some additional cooling capacity. And there's a heatsink here that actually focuses just on simplicity. It's the Noctua L9x65. So it focuses straightforward, simplicity of design, simplicity of installation, and just great quality overall. The design's pretty unique too, with a typical downdraft layout, but with a twist, since it mounts a small, slim 90mm fan on a tall heatsink. And look, the X65 isn't the cheapest here by any stretch of the imagination, but it's got Noctua's pedigree, and that counts for a whole lot. And another cooler that's got a great pedigree and the same height as the Noctua is the Arctic Alpine 23CO that's built for AMD systems. But look, I won't spend much time on it since the CO is basically meant as a direct replacement for AMD's stock race series coolers, but it's built more with a focus on delivering absolute silence. But what isn't inexpensive, and remember, $12 for that Arctic cooler, you compare that to something like the last cooler in this roundup, and that is the Noctua L12 Ghost Edition. This is actually the heatsink that I ended up making an exception for. Instead of the 65mm cap for this whole roundup, this thing is 66mm. Now, history behind this, Noctua designed this to fit directly into Low-Key's Ghost series cases, so users of that could have an air-cooled option. In order to achieve that, they also replaced the standard 120mm fan on the original L12S with a 92mm one, so memory compatibility could stick to 48mm high. But anyways, what I wanted to do is have the most comprehensive list of all the ultra low and low profile coolers, so that's basically where we are right now. And if you're wondering about height and prices all in one place, here's all the coolers in this roundup lined up according to how much clearance they need relative to their prices. I know ITX users sometimes fight for literally every last millimeter, so I really hope this helps, and by all means, pause the video here if you need to. I also wanted to give a quick mention about, well, installation. I know I go through this in every single video because there are always some just ridiculous situations, but luckily in this one, every single cooler here has a completely manageable installation process, which is pretty mind-blowing to me. But anyways, I wanted to break it down for you either way. So on the left here are coolers with the best of the best installation process, so using either the stock AMD backplate or their own, and they don't have a ridiculously huge kit of parts. On the right here is ones that might not have a backplate, like a lot of the ID cooling stuff, or they have a couple of smaller components here and there, but it's nothing other than a little bit of a challenge. Not great, not perfect, but they are still completely manageable. But you know what's really manageable? That is the new K5 keyboards from Xtrfy. You've got to check these out, guys.
So I'm supposed to just build this? The new K5. Customize your own with a ton of color options for the entire assembly, plus plenty of switch varieties with a hot swap body, or choose the retail black or transparent white models. The PCB mounted stabs are factory lubed, the RGB boost mode is freaking cool, and the Super Scan Tech scans your keystrokes every half a millisecond for outstanding performance, all for a quality feel. The Xtrfy K5 Compact. Explore your perfect 65% keyboard below.
All right, with that out of the way, I wanted to get on to the performance testing. But if you're interested in our methodologies, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time in this video talking about them because we've gone through them over and over and over again in every single cooler video. So you can just head up here, click on that link. There's going to be a timestamp in that video where you can check out the full methodology and how to properly read our charts that we're going to put up here. All right, so starting with a 65-watt thermal output, and you'll see a trend start to develop right away. The lowest price coolers here, like the KR-01, A71C, and Alpine 23CO, are all grouped together. I honestly wasn't expecting the Silverstone cooler to do all that well, but it actually beat the others at lower decibel levels. The middle of the pack performers will probably surprise you. It's the Shuriken 2 and Noctua L9x65. They both offer pretty good cooling compared to the cheaper solutions, but their strengths aren't with cooling off lower wattage CPUs. The next best is the ID Cooling IS-60 EVO, which actually beats out the Noctua by a solid 2 to 3 degrees. And since it's able to spin those fans to super high levels, it gets the lowest overall results too. But it's actually not the best here. That award gets shared by 3 coolers: the L12 Ghost, AXP100, and, believe it or not, the tiny IS-50X V2. That's crazy when you remember the AXP100 and IS-50X are 2 of the shortest coolers here. Now, I mean, look at these 2 things next to one another. And remember, these are getting the same performance. It might not look like much on camera, but those few millimeters between these 2 count for a lot in the ITX market. It also counts a lot for cooling capacity. Now, the fact that IAD cooling was able to achieve these results with a more compact design than the L12 Ghost, that's just mind-blowing to me. But anyways, we're going to see if these 2 stack up when it comes to higher wattages a little bit later. But let's also narrow this down to a bit more manageable chart and also add some of the best ultra low profile coolers around, the Blackridge and AXP90R. It actually becomes pretty obvious that at lower wattages, they can keep up without any problems whatsoever. Actually, to me, the most interesting thing here is how the Alpine A71C and KR-01 don't really provide much better performance than the Wraith Stealth. Basically, what they offer is comparable performance, but in a smaller, shorter form factor. And you know what? That's okay too. And if you're wondering how every single low-profile cooler lines up with one another, yep, all 19 of them that I've tested so far. And get ready to pause here, guys, because here are all the ones that are shorter than 50 millimeters, along with the Wraith Stealth. And here are the ones I'm covering in this roundup. So it's even more obvious the Thermalright L12 and IS-50X are pretty much head and shoulders above everything else. Now, look, that establishes your baseline 65 watts when it comes to performance. But what happens when we push things to 95 watt all core load? Now, I don't really care what any of these coolers is technically rated for, because we've seen again and again and again with modern processors, a lot of those TDP ratings that these heat sinks are rated for are absolutely BS, and they start shitting the bed. So let's see if that happens again with these ones. And this one's gonna be easy too, because out of the 9 coolers, only 5 ended up running below our 90-degree threshold. One was the L9x65 that was only able to get below 90 degrees with its fan running at near full speed. Meanwhile, the IS-50X and L12 Ghost ended up tied again, even though the Ghost costs almost twice as much. And man, I keep being impressed with that tiny thing from ID Cooling. It just feels like they found some kind of secret sauce here. Meanwhile, the IS-60 EVO probably had the most interesting results here, I'd say. It pumped out okay numbers at low decibel levels, but if you're willing to put up with a bit more noise, it's got that extra gear of higher fan speeds. But the winner by a country mile is the AXP100 Copper. I mean, it isn't even close. The next best heatsinks are a clear 2 to 4 degrees behind. Anyways, moving on to our usual 38 decibel summary chart, and there's a very clear trend going on here too. The very best coolers stay the best, but I still wouldn't recommend running intensive all-core rendering workloads on any of these coolers with a higher wattage modern CPU in a confined ITX case. I mean, the taller ones that were added in this roundup give you a fighting chance at least, but that's about it. I'm gonna level with everybody too. What you've been seeing here so far is a worst case scenario for an ITX system. Basically, a relatively hot running CPU running an all-core workload for 30 minutes. Now, that is not necessarily representative of how a lot of you are probably using your ITX systems. You're probably gaming on them. So what we wanted to do is introduce another test here, and that is a gaming load. So yes, the CPU is involved a little bit, but now the coolers also have to contend with the GPU dumping a ton of hot air into the case. And the way that they perform is actually pretty interesting, even if we keep that CPU at 95 watts. So at the lower end, not much has changed with the Alpine 23CO, KR-01, and A71C, all basically within a few degrees of one another at less than 40 decibels. But the award for the most inconsistent performer here actually goes to the Shuriken 2. It destroys those less expensive coolers at quieter fan speeds, but then it's either equaled or narrowly beaten by the A71C. Then, like in other tests, there's a massive gap between those coolers and the rest, with the Noctua L9x65 being beaten by 1 or 2 degrees by the IS-60 EVO. The AXP100 also ends up losing a bit of ground here and pretty much mirroring the results of those two. And guess who that leaves again? Yep, the IS-50X V2 and L12 Ghost. Two coolers with very different designs and sizes, but simply the best results yet again. And the gap between the good coolers here and the best of the best ends up widening even more, while the Wraith Stealth gets completely bent out of shape. And the two best ultra low profile coolers I've tested end up doing pretty well too. That gap actually becomes even more evident with all the low profile coolers in the same chart regardless of their height. There's the best of the best, a whole bunch that give decent temperatures while gaming, and then finally ones I wouldn't recommend unless you have a very, very specific use for them. So I guess that brings me to the recommendations. So first of all, best low profile cooler that I've tested so far when it comes to performance, just performance alone, that is the AXP100 from Thermalright. What Thermalright has been able to do with such a compact design is just, it boggles the mind, guys. But I guess that brings me to the overall winner of all of these roundups, and it's the IS-50X V2. It has it all. It's got the price at just between 35 and 40 bucks. It has performance because at 35 to 40 bucks, it matches the performance, at least in our test system, as the L12 Ghost that goes for $70 and more. The other thing is that it's got an okay installation method, but it's completely doable for most folks. But what happens if you don't want to spend, say, 35, 40 bucks on a cooler and you're just looking for a basic upgrade to your stock solution? That is a little bit of a tougher one, but I'm actually going to recommend, now you can write in the comments below that you completely disagree with this. I completely understand if you do so, and I will respond to you. It is the Cooler Master A71C. Look, this is not going to win any performance comparisons, but what it is, it's a decent upgrade over the stock AMD heatsink. For novices, the installation method is ultra straightforward, so you're not going to be completely turned off of PC building because you have to fiddle with all these small parts. This one, if you're just looking for a basic upgrade, it has it all. But anyways, I guess that really brings me to the conclusion of all of these 19 coolers that we've tested. I really hope that you enjoyed all of this content, all of the time and hard work the entire team here in Montreal put into them. I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks. If you have any other recommendations, put them down below, and I'm going to see you in the next one.